I am here with my colleague, Scotti Weintraub, and you are the founder of Reframe Parenting.
Yes. Reframe Parenting. That's me.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Tell us about Reframe Parenting.
Oh, thanks. Reframe Parenting really was born out of my own frustrations as a parent.
Mm.
When my kids were newly in school, they had a lot of challenges, and it was hard for me as a parent to figure out what to do with that when I was getting a lot of negative feedback from teachers, and then feeling just frustrated and alone and not knowing what to do when your kid is having a hard time in school started to feel kind of overwhelming. And over time, and sort of my researcher nature led me to deep dive into how to how to fix this, how to negotiate in the systems. And then I started casually helping other people. And then I realized, like, this need is huge. There are so many people whose kids are having trouble in school for a variety of reasons, who really don't know what questions to ask, who they can connect with, or what information they might need to gather in order to help their kids succeed at school. So that's where Reframe Parenting was born. And I help parents figure out what the heck to do when their kids are having a hard time at school.
You said you were getting
Sure.
negative feedback from
Yeah.
teachers. What does
Yes.
that look like?
Well, it can look like a lot of different things for different kids, but it could be, he's not trying hard enough.
Hmm.
Or if they just concentrated, they could figure it out. Or I know they're smart, but, or sometimes it's very specific around they did this and then they did that and they were disruptive in this way or didn't pay attention in that way. And so it can start to, over time, really erode at a kid's self esteem. And it's really
Yeah.
frustrating for a parent.
And if without getting to the source of the issue, we just sort of blame the kid.
Yeah,
And
I think there can be a lot of blame, and just putting that information on a parent as if parents have the ability to fix things, which, as a parent, that's not actually always possible. And
yeah,
especially in a school setting where, as a parent, you're not there every day. A lot of teachers are very invested in their students. They care about them, they want them to succeed. But I also know that teachers have very little training in things like learning disabilities or different brain wirings and neurodiversity. And so when you have a situation where you have a child who is having behavioral problems, instead of just looking at what the end result of that is, which is distraction or disruption or not getting their work done, I think what would be better is for us to dig a little deeper and look at, well, what is behind that behavior? Because if we agree with Dr. Ross Green, who I am a big fan of his work, his concept is
hmm
that kids do well when they can, and behavior is communication. So if we
hmm
look at only at the
yes,
end behavior, we're missing, well, what came before that? What triggered that behavior? What's really going on? What is that need that's unmet for them?
uh-huh.
If we can get to that and figure that out, then we're not even getting to the behavior part. Then we've cut it off at
Right.
the chase.
Okay, so behavior is communication. In other words, if a kid is acting out, they're trying to tell us something.
They are probably not with a lot of cognition that
Mhm.
that's what they're
Yeah,
doing, but more that they're communicating that their need isn't being met.
right.
So if we can figure out, do they not understand what they're supposed to be doing, and therefore they get distracted and don't pay attention?
Mhm.
Are they, or do they need to move around and they're being asked to sit for long periods of time, and that
Mhm.
then causes their physical need for movement is causing problems. But if we just kind of dig a little deeper and go backwards
Mhm.
onto, well, what is this kid telling me that they really need in this moment, then I think we can curtail a lot of the problems.
Tell us about some of what your kids' needs were and are, and how you went about advocating for them.
Well, my kids both really struggled with anxiety and how that would play out in the classroom. And I think that that's a piece that teachers don't always understand either, because with regards to anxiety, we have this sense that it's all about being a perfectionist,
Hmm.
that kids or people who are anxious are worried about their grades, are worried about performance. And when in fact, sometimes anxiety can look like combativeness,
Hmm.
frustration. And so that's one of the pieces that we ran into for our family too, is that we knew pretty clearly what was going on around our child's anxiety, but we were having a lot of resistance to even framing it in that way in a classroom setting.
So how was it playing out?
I mean, our son would get very dysregulated in class and would then be disruptive, talk to other kids because that felt more comfortable than feeling like he didn't know what was going on, and then would have behavioral problems. At times, run out of the classroom, just have a, and the teacher, the example I'm thinking of, the teacher kept coming to me and saying, something needs to change.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, okay, but what am I supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
Just telling me something needs to change when you're the
Yeah.
one in control of this classroom setting isn't actually productive, and instead just makes me as a parent feel shame,
Hmm.
frustration, and it didn't get us anywhere. But yeah, we dealt with a lot of anxiety. I have one child who has ADHD and we're still having some challenges in school around that. We learned that my oldest child had hidden learning disabilities that nobody had flagged, that we didn't find until much later. And so I think just sometimes those kids like fall through the cracks, and then
Hmm.
it's just frustration after frustration. And then they start hating school.
Yeah.
And then we've got a whole nother problem. So if we can try to meet kids where they're at in the first place, instead of saying something needs to change, saying, hey, this is what I'm noticing. I'm
Hmm.
going to try a few things.
Hmm.
That would have been, in my mind, a better response.
Right. Or even just communicating it to you in a more productive way.
Right. And what I heard from that particular teacher was a lot of frustration. And I
Uh-huh.
get it, right? Like I'm sure it's frustrating.
Hmm.
There's no doubt about that. But it's it's the teacher's responsibility to move past their own frustration into
That's
problem
right.
solving.
Yeah. So in other words, our educators have some responsibility to get to the core needs of our kids,
Yes.
not just to teach.
Right. Because they can't actually teach some of these kids until they get to those core needs.
Yeah. And in your case, you were telling me parents sort of need to be the squeaky wheel.
Yes, squeaky wheel. And I know that's sometimes really uncomfortable for some people because
Hmm.
it's just not naturally their way of being in the world. And
Hmm.
especially in a setting where you as a parent don't have a lot of power, where the
Yeah.
teachers are the experts, you're not there every day. It's their professional life and your personal life, because you've got parents who love their kids deeply, coming up against a professional setting that's not their own. It's just,
Hmm.
it's a dynamic that's kind of hard to navigate sometimes.
You know, it is. It's really hard to navigate, and I'm kind of smiling because I'm reflecting on myself. My 13-year-old is. I haven't gotten any negative feedback, but I also don't really. I'd like to know what his strengths are, how his writing is doing, etc. And the point is, I have a lot of my fellow friends, parents say to me, "No, you got to do this. Email the principal, this and that." And I'm kind of thinking, it's not that easy. I don't roll that way. I can get into that in my therapy, but it's hard
Yeah,
for those of us that it just doesn't come natural to us. So
right.
I feel like I'm bugging people.
Right. And
Like
for me,
leave them
I had
alone.
to get over, yeah, I had to get over some of my good girl tendencies of
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm supposed to follow rules and, be accommodating. And instead, I had to say, okay, well, what's in the best interest of my child? And that might
Yeah.
be that I have to kind of be that squeaky wheel right now. I'm
Right.
not saying that people should be unkind or accusatory towards teachers because they have a very difficult job, as you said. They're managing a big classroom. But instead, what I tell parents is to be curious, lead with curiosity. So it's leading with questions. I've been noticing that this is the feedback I'm getting from my child. Can you tell me more about what's happening? Like that's an invitation to a conversation rather than blaming or getting people on the defensive.
And is that a lot of what you teach in your program? How to talk productively with educators and professionals?
Yeah, I think because partnering with teachers, and I will say it again, that I think teachers care deeply about students and want them to succeed. So if we start from that as our frame of reference, and we're assuming good intent on all sides, parents want their kids to succeed, teachers want their kids to succeed, but somehow the kid isn't succeeding the way we want them to right now. So where is our disconnect? And if that's where the questions come in, okay, let's look at where are things falling apart. Is there a particular time of day that happens? Is it after certain activities? Is it in a certain class or subject area? Asking those questions and gathering information really, I think, is a great starting point. So that's what I talk with parents about.
I think that's really important because even as a professional that works with kids myself, when parents partner with me, it's enjoyable and you want to do your job. And we all want kids to succeed. When parents, like full disclosure, kind of want me to fix their kids and give me a list of behaviors they believe need to be changed, it's not that I ignore their calls, but you get a little lump in your stomach because you're going to have to somehow be on the defensive or have a discussion that's not really productive.
Right. Well, that's a tall order just to tell a therapist that,
yeah,
you need to fix these things.
Sometimes parents, we look at it that way. Like, I know what's best for my child, and I'm going to tell you what needs to be done without realizing that's not exactly how therapy works. It's more of a confidential, safe space where a kid is led toward their own values.
Right. Well, something I talk to parents about too is that part of this process of really showing up to advocate for your child is also kind of getting over your own expectation, kind of really realizing that maybe your visions for what your child should and could be are not actually in line with who they are. Really seeing your child for who they are, which is not who you are or who you were when you were a student. I hear a lot like, well, I could turn my work in on time. Why can't my kid turn my work? Yeah, because you're not them. And I don't say that in a flip way. I say that in this is hard work way. This is like the parenting journey, is knowing that each child is on their unique own personal journey, and their unique personality and brain wiring will make them a person that is different than you.
Yeah, I feel like I'm getting that same message from my last 5 guests on this podcast. It's so important, whether we're talking about education, advocacy, all aspects of well-being have to do with our expectations of our kids. So you talk about partnering with professionals. We're better able to partner with our kids when we're curious about them rather than judging them, which happens when we have definite expectations.
Right.
And those expectations, it's a hard habit to break because, of course, my kid is going to college.
I think it's a really important one because we need to meet them where they are right now, not where we want them to be, not where we wished they were, not where their peers are, but where they are right now.
We want to advocate for the right things, their core needs, so they can learn, as opposed to saying, I want my son to learn how to be an engineer. And it's not happening.
Right. When really, in fact, what your son in this scenario might want is to do art or play music.
Yeah.
or right. You know, does your child need accommodations in
Mhm.
order to best learn? Where are they right this moment? And
Mhm.
how can you best meet that need right now? I think that one's a really hard one for parents. And it certainly is hard for me sometimes too.
And really listening to our kids and meeting them where they are, it can have a lot of different implications. In some cases, we have to be the squeaky wheel. Maybe in some cases, we don't have to be the squeaky wheel
Right.
because our kid is motivated and we're helicoptering over them.
Right. It means, yeah, when is it time to step in? When is it time to pull back? And that, you know, really kind of keying into what's happening.
My parents weren't like kids should be seen, not heard. They were attentive parents, but for the most part, kids were expected to be independent and go play and go do your
Mhm.
homework.
I feel like, well, you asked what has changed. I think we also now we have a lot more information about how brains work
Uh-huh.
now that we didn't have before. You know, what is neurodiversity? I had never heard of neurodiversity when I was a kid.
Me
You were
neither.
either in my high school, you were either a really good student or you were, I don't even know what you were. There was no, because
But
I
a
was on the high achieving
burnout,
track.
was that the
Right, right.
you were
You
smoking cigarettes?
out by the wall.
It
That
was,
was the distinction in my high school experience. Either you did well or you didn't.
yeah,
And there was no middle ground, and there was no
right.
like trying to get those students' needs met. We didn't know about
Yeah, that's right.
neurodiversity. We didn't know about ADHD. We knew nothing about the real diversity of how people learn and grow and develop, right? So now what we see is an embracing of all of this information.
Hmm.
So how does that look different? And you won't be shocked to hear that a lot of times parents, when they find that their child has a neurodiversity, for instance, they realize, oh, I think maybe my brain works differently too.
Hmm.
But we as adults now had none of that information. We had none of that empathy.
Hmm.
You were just a goof off or not a great
Yeah,
student, when in fact, there might have been something else going on for you.
it makes me think it was in many ways that simple. We just looked at it as unmotivated kids
Mm-hmm.
that were going to have a tough time and a bleak future. And that was just that. Whereas,
How many of those kids fell through the cracks, right?
right. Tell us how your program works.
Well, I do one-on-one coaching with parents and help them uncover these things we're talking about by asking questions, by figuring out what's going on in school, by strategizing around what to ask for, who to find out, how to gather a team of professionals around you. Because sometimes what happens is that kids end up with a diagnosis, not all the time, but
Hmm.
sometimes they do. And so, how to gather that information, what to do with that, that's the kind of coaching that I work with parents around.
Hmm.
I also have a mini course around working with teachers, partnering with teachers, and I'm working on developing even more resources and information because I just think that this is such a huge need for
Yeah.
parents.
I can think of, I mean, right off the bat, 25 to 30% of my caseload of teenagers is there's a concern of, as you put it, falling through the cracks. They're not
Mhm.
comfortable in school, and it has to do with an underlying need.
Right.
None of my kids are bad kids. Yeah.
And just putting up our hands and saying, well, this is just going to be what it's going to be, doesn't help them
Hmm.
succeed in the way we really ultimately, I think all parents want their kids to succeed.
Right.
So, what I try to do is help parents really stand up in that way
Hmm.
and realize why their own advocacy is so important.
Scotti, thank you so much
Oh, you're so
for
welcome. It
being
was really
here.
fun.
This was great. Really appreciate it. And thank you for
Give
the
you a
work
few
you
things.
do. How can my listeners find you?
They can find me on my website, reframeparenting.com, or
Okay.
on Instagram, also just reframe parenting. And feel free to reach out. I return emails. It's I'm a one person show, so I'm always
Okay,
here.
thanks.